Have you ever stopped to consider that perhaps the pyramids of Egypt are not just monuments of the past, but mirrors of something we still experience today? We tend to believe they were built by chained slaves in eternal suffering, but the truth is quite different and perhaps more surprising than any movie has ever shown. What truly moved those giant stones was not just brute force, but a mix of faith, social strategy, and even life changing benefits for those who participated. The paradox is this: what many see as a symbol of oppression was also, in a way, a collective project that provided sustenance, identity, and even pride for thousands of ordinary people. What if I told you that this logic still repeats itself, disguised in our modern world? Large corporations, governments, and even social causes use the same mechanism, mobilizing masses to build something greater than each individual. But what lay behind these workers' routines? What was it like to wake up every day, smell the warm dust, hear the sound of hammers, and know that your life was in service of something eternal? This is a part of the story that is rarely told, precisely because it is neither obvious nor glamorous. It is slow, detailed, human, and that is where the true fascination lies. Prepare to walk with me through the desert, enter the simple lodgings, mentally taste the stale bread and thick beer that sustained the builders, and feel for a few moments what it was like to live in this world that blended exhaustion and eternity. In the end, you will realize that the pyramids were not just constructions, but lessons in what it means to be part of something greater than ourselves. Now, before we begin, I want you to comment below, where are you watching this video from and what time is it in your city? At the beginning of it all, when the banks of the Nile teemed with life, a civilization began to rise, almost timidly but full of purpose. Ancient Egypt was not just a place on the map, it was a living laboratory where people, ideas, and beliefs met to shape what we understand as a complex society. There was something fascinating about the fact that while many peoples were still struggling simply to survive, the Egyptians already looked to the heavens and dreamed of leaving eternal marks on the earth. As I walked through those villages, the constant sound of the river's waters mingled with the sound of baskets being woven, stones being polished, and children running barefoot through the sand. It wasn't a glamorous daily routine, but it had an almost hypnotic cadence. Today, if someone sits in front of a computer screen, organizing spreadsheets or answering emails, they might not realize it. They're repeating the same human desire to bring order to chaos and build something lasting. Egypt flourished because it tamed the Nile and made it more than a river. It transformed it into a stream of opportunity. Just as today, it's said that data is the new oil, back then, water was the true currency of power. Whoever controlled the flow of irrigation also controlled the fate of crops, villages, and consequently, history. Isn't it curious how centuries later, we remain trapped in the logic of who controls the essential resources? Cities began to emerge as organized patches on the landscape, replete with rituals and hierarchies. Imagine a peasant's daily awakening, opening his eyes to the smell of smoke from a smoldering fire, slowly chewing a piece of stale bread, and then heading out into the fields alongside dozens of other men. Today, it's not much different. We wake to the smell of coffee, rush to catch transport, and repeat rituals that from the outside seem choreographed. It is in this contrast between past and present that we perceive the great lesson of ancient Egypt. Social complexity did not arise suddenly, but was woven day after day, like threads of linen that, when intertwined, become fabric. Each routine, however banal it seemed, sustained a greater dream. Perhaps this explains why we feel so connected to them, even after millennia. After all, Aren't we also invisible builders of something we will never see complete? And it was precisely from this desire to leave something beyond one's own existence that monuments and ideas emerged that would shape centuries of civilization. But to better understand how this world was structured, we must look to a central, almost divine figure who served as the hub of the entire machine. In the heart of ancient Egypt, there was a presence that seemed to loom above all, almost unattainable: the pharaoh. He was not just a ruler, he was seen as a divine being, the bridge between men and gods. Imagine living in a place where every order, every decree was interpreted not just as a political decision, but as a sacred command. The centralization of power had an aura of mystery that made even the simplest peasants believe they were serving something greater than themselves. Upon waking, his subjects remembered that their lives depended directly on the will of this near mythical figure. The smell of baked bread in the morning, the sound of water being drawn from the well, even the simple act of harvesting wheat, all of this, deep down, was done in the pharaoh's nets. It's curious to think how today, in the 21st century, we also follow invisible orders, work goals, bills, deadlines. The name has changed, but the logic of obedience remains. The pharaoh possessed an apparatus of power that wasn't limited to guards or soldiers. He had scribes, priests, and administrators who spread his voice as if it were the echo of the gods themselves. This network created a sense of stability, even if it was in practice a form of absolute control. It's like when, in a modern company, you don't know the owner but you feel their presence in every rule, in every email signed by the board. For many, the idea of centralizing everything in one person might seem suffocating, but in Egypt, it brought a kind of relief. It was comforting to believe that there was someone guiding the order of the universe, someone who got up every day with the mission of keeping the sun rising and the Nile flowing. Of course, today we know that life doesn't work that way, but isn't it comforting to imagine that there's always a pharaoh taking care of the details we can't control? His palaces, filled with the scent of incense, walls painted with divine scenes, and servants constantly moving about, reinforced the idea that he was no mere mortal. Even the way he walked, erect and slow, conveyed the certainty that time bent to his rhythm. Anyone who has entered a room where everyone stops when a leader enters can understand this feeling. It's not just respect, it's a silent reverence. This centralization shaped not only politics but also the daily lives of the Egyptians, leading the people to accept the effort of great construction as part of a cosmic order. And this belief, almost unshakable, would be the perfect engine for erecting monuments that would defy the centuries. The pyramid wasn't just a pile of stones, but a silent message to time: we exist and will never be forgotten. Each block carried the idea of eternity, as if the pharaoh had found a way to converse with the future. Imagine the impact of living in a time when it was believed that a building could open the door to the afterlife. Today, we call it a legacy, but for them, it was literally the bridge to divinity. At sunrise, when the golden light touched the pyramid's sloping faces, the people saw more than just a work of architecture. There was a profound symbolism, the connection between heaven and earth. The hot desert air carried the scent of sand rising in the wind, and in that moment, everyone felt as if the physical and spiritual worlds had intersected. Isn't it curious how even today we look to monuments, be they buildings, statues, or even books, to sense something transcending our own existence? For the pharaoh, the pyramid was his eternal home, a stone palace built to ensure his immortality. He thought not only of ruling the living, but also of dominating the realm of the dead. He's similar to modern business people who build foundations, museums, or universities in their name. The quest is the same: not to disappear into oblivion, but to perpetuate himself in the collective imagination. The pyramid's perfect angles, pointing skyward, were more than engineering. They were petrified prayers. It was as if each stone said, "Here is the path to the god." Think of how we use symbols today: a cross, a wedding ring, a logo. These are all ways of transforming invisible ideas into something tangible. The Egyptians were masters at this game, translating their faith into imposing, geometric forms. The pyramid's grandeur also served as a daily reminder to the people. There was something greater than themselves, something eternal. As they munched stale bread or carried jugs of water, all they had to do was look up to see that their labor was not in vain. Who hasn't found themselves staring at a gigantic building in a city and wondering, how did they build that? The difference is that in Egypt, the answer was imbued with spirituality. This symbolism, however, didn't stop at faith. It spilled over into politics, reinforcing the pharaoh's image as a being above men. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a message etched into the horizon, reminding everyone who truly held power. And this blend of divinity and politics would pave the way for understanding how much religion underpinned this monumental endeavor. In ancient Egypt, religion wasn't a detail of life. It was the very fabric that wove together every moment of existence. The rising sun wasn't just a natural phenomenon, but Ra's victory over darkness. When the Nile overflowed, it wasn't seen as a simple natural cycle, but as a divine gift. And in this context, great constructions emerged, not just as feats of engineering, but as offerings that would ensure cosmic balance. Imagine waking up knowing that the bread you eat, the water you drink, and even the roof over your head are in some way gifts from the gods. It's almost like when someone today attributes their achievements to a higher power, whether they call it fate, luck, or faith. In Egypt, this perception was so strong that it justified even the hardest labor under the scorching sun. Each stone carried was a gesture of devotion. Priests played an essential role in this process, acting as interpreters between the divine and the human. They translated signs, interpreted dreams, and ensured that the pharaoh was in tune with the deity. It's curious to think how, today, we still seek figures who bridge this gap: pastors, spiritual leaders, gurus. The need to believe that someone holds the answers has always been present in humanity. The pyramids, temples, and obelisks were not erected out of vanity alone, but as part of a spiritual contract. It was as if each monument were an insurance policy for eternity, guaranteeing the pharaoh's safe passage to the afterlife. When we look at modern skyscrapers bearing the names of powerful families, we realize that the logic continues: transform wealth into lasting symbols that echo through time. The rituals surrounding these buildings reinforced the sense that everything had a divine purpose. The sound of chanting, the aroma of burning incense, the gleam of polished stones illuminated by the sun. Every detail reminded the people that work was more than sweat, it was materialized. Today, on a smaller scale, we see this when someone decorates their house for Christmas or lights a candle before an altar. The simple gesture carries symbolic weight. This blend of faith and power meant that religion was the foundation of the pyramids, making it impossible to separate the sacred from the political. And it is precisely at this point that the pinnacle of these constructions is revealed: the Old Kingdom, when faith, power, and stone came together to create something that seemed eternal. It was during the so-called Old Kingdom that the pyramids reached their grandest expression. This period is remembered as the Age of the Pyramids, when powerful pharaohs such as Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure decided to leave such profound marks that they would span millennia. Imagine the scene: thousands of workers moving like organized ants, each with their own function, all united by a common vision that transcended life itself. The atmosphere was one of devotion and discipline. The rhythmic sound of copper hammers, the dragging of stones over ramps covered in wet sand, and the shouts of supervisors formed a melody repeated day after. Today, it might be like the hubbub of an industrial city, factories churning non-stop, people coming and going from offices,
each one turning the invisible cog of a larger machine. The Pyramid of Khufu in Giza became the largest of all, an artificial mountain that still amazes today. For the Egyptians of the time, it was not only an impressive work of art, but a testament to faith and power. It's as if each block were a page in a vast book, telling the story of a pharaoh who refused to disappear. When one visits this monument today, one feels as if one is confronted with an enigma, a message left for those who came after. The magnitude of these constructions required meticulous planning. Scribes recorded every detail, from the amount of bread distributed to the workers to the pace of tasks. This meticulous control is reminiscent of modern management in large companies or even digital projects, where every click, every metric is recorded and analyzed. The difference is that in Egypt, the result was visible in stones that touched the sky. Around these buildings, small workers' towns sprang up, bustling with life. The smell of fermenting beer, the muffled laughter during downtime, and the stories told by the light of the campfire created a routine that, though harsh, gave the workers a sense of belonging. It was as if they were saying, "We too are part of eternity," and in a way they were. This period of splendor, however, would not last forever. Like any intense flame, the pyramid's brilliance would face political, economic, and social crises. But before plunging into decline, it is necessary to understand how the organization of state labor transformed the pyramid into much more than a tomb. When observing a pyramid today, many people think only of giant tombs, but in ancient Egypt, the meaning was much broader. Building a pyramid was a state undertaking, involving resources, logistics, and organization on a large scale. It wasn't just about ensuring the afterlife of a pharaoh, but about mobilizing an entire society around a common goal. It was, in a way, the government's way of demonstrating strength and cohesion. Imagine the impact on a peasant who left his field for months to work on the actual construction. He didn't just see stones being stacked, he felt he was participating in something grand. It was like when someone today works on the construction of a World Cup stadium or a large bridge. They know it's not for them, but they understand it's part of a collective narrative. This sense of belonging gave the pyramid the character of a national project. The state organized everything from tax collection to food distribution, ensuring that thousands of workers were sustained for months. Scribes, with their papyrus scrolls, recorded every sack of grain, every jug of beer, every batch of stone that arrived at the construction site. Attention to these details was crucial, as a single gear failure could jeopardize the entire construction. Today we call this project management, but back then, it was pure political survival. This type of initiative also helped boost the economy. Masons, farmers, artisans, and boatmen found work in the process. The pyramid functioned as a machine for employment and the circulation of wealth. It's similar to large infrastructure projects undertaken by modern governments, which seek to generate jobs and stimulate entire sectors of the economy. In Egypt, this cycle further strengthened the pharaoh's role as supreme provider. More than a monument, the pyramid was also a showcase of power. It demonstrated from afar that the state had the power to control labor, resources, and time. Anyone who gazed upon that colossal mass of stone understood they were standing before an unquestionable authority. Just as skyscrapers symbolize the strength of a city or country today, the pyramids were a constant reminder of the state's cataclysm. This vision of state design, far beyond the funerary aspect, paved the way for a complex network of administrators and organizers who ensured every detail was met. And it is precisely these often forgotten figures who reveal how the hidden machinery of power worked in ancient Egypt. Behind every stone, erected and every block fitted together, there was a group who carried the weight not on their shoulders but in their hands. The administrators and scribes. These men were the true maestros of the construction, recording, organizing, and deciding every step. As the workers sweated under the sun, they filled papyrus scrolls with numbers, names, and measurements. It was a silent, but essential power without which no pyramid would stand. Their daily lives were marked by lighter, more rhythmic sounds. The scratching of reed pens on papyrus, the clinking of ink jars, and the constant murmur of discussions about deadlines and deliverables. Today, it would be like the clatter of keyboards in a modern office. Anyone who has worked on spreadsheets, meetings, or reports can well imagine the role of these scribes, perhaps with more similarities than we'd like to admit. They were responsible for controlling grain stocks, recording how many men arrived for work, and calculating stone transport distances. Without them, the construction site would descend into chaos. It's like a large company, even though the workers are the lifeblood. Without managers and organizers, the final result is lost. It's curious how this dynamic continues to this day. The tools change, but not the essence. The prestige of scribes stemmed precisely from this ability to transform information into order. They didn't have large muscles, but they possessed the power of writing, something rare and almost magical in those days. It was as if only a select few knew how to decipher the secret code that kept the world running. And come to think of it, the same is true today for those who master programming languages or advanced technical knowledge. These administrators were also the link between the pharaoh and the people, ensuring that divine orders arrived clearly and practically. They knew that in their hands lay not only numbers, but also the trust of an entire civilization. This gave them a responsibility that went beyond simple record keeping. Anyone who has coordinated a team knows what it's like. Pressure comes not only from above, but also from below, from the expectations of those who depend on the organization's smooth running. And while these men maintained order with papyrus and calculations, other groups were responsible for carrying out the physical work. These divisions of tasks kept the wheels turning constant. To understand how this immense social body moved in harmony, we must take a closer look at the division of specialized teams. In the vastness of the pyramid construction sites, work was not haphazard. Each group had a defined role. Like carefully arranged pieces on a chessboard, there were teams of stonecutters, transporters, ramp builders, and even those dedicated solely to preparing food for the others. This division demonstrated how the Egyptians understood almost instinctively that greatness is only achieved when each person contributes their specialty. The day began early, with the sun tinging the desert golden. The sound of chisels echoed on one side, while on the other the rhythmic scraping of blocks across the sand could be heard. Further ahead, voices mingled with the beating of drums used to mark the rhythm of transportation. Today, if you walk into a factory or a hospital, the logic is the same. Each sector does its part, and everyone works together to keep the machine running. Teams also had leaders responsible for ensuring the task was completed. It wasn't just brute force. There was strategy. Anyone who's ever been on a sports team or a group project knows the feeling. If one person doesn't do their job, the whole team suffers. In Egypt, this could mean entire days of delays, or worse still, jeopardize the stability of the project. There were also specialists with rare skills, such as sculptors who knew how to shape hieroglyphics, or architects who adjusted angles with astonishing precision. These men were like the elite professionals of their time, comparable to modern software engineers or surgeons. It's curious how, despite centuries of distance, we continue to value talents that few master. This group organization allowed thousands of people to work in harmony, even without sophisticated machinery. It was almost like an orchestra, where each instrument, no matter how simple, played a crucial role in the melody. And this discipline, repeated day after day, transformed rough stones into eternal monuments. But not all were part of the elite of specialists. Many were peasants who temporarily left their plantations to join the workforce, and it is precisely through this recruitment dynamic that we better understand how Egypt reconciled rural life with the demands of the pharaoh. When the Nile flooded, the fertile lands were covered with water, making cultivation impossible for several months.
This period, which could have been a period of inactivity for the peasants, became an opportunity for the state. It was during this period that many farmers were recruited to work on the pyramids. Thus, idle time in the fields was converted into labor for the construction of eternal monuments. Imagine the scene. The peasant woke up early, looked at his submerged crops, and knew he wouldn't be able to plant or harvest for weeks. Instead of standing idle, he was called to join the ranks of construction workers. Today, it's like when companies take advantage of school holidays to hire young temporary workers, or when governments create public works programs to reduce unemployment. Essentially, it's the same logic of using free time to move society forward. The journey of these peasants to the construction sites was an experience in itself. They set out in groups, walking along the banks of the Nile, carrying simple tools and few belongings. The smell of the water mingled with the clay, and the sound of boats carrying supplies accompanied the journey. For many, it was their first time away from their villages, which made it a mixture of fear and fascination. These workers didn't receive gold or large rewards, but they were supported with food, beer, and shelter during the construction period. For them, this already represented an advantage. Besides ensuring their survival, they were able to participate in something greater than their own plantation. Today, it's similar to those who accept internships or temporary jobs. The immediate gain may be modest, but the learning and experience bring additional value. The rotation between farm life and construction work maintains social balance. When the waters receded, the peasants returned to their lands, now with stories to tell, and perhaps even a new sense of belonging. It was as if they carried with them the pride of having been part of a collective project that went far beyond their small harvest. This recruitment model reveals how Egypt managed to mobilize thousands of people without resorting to mass slavery. And among the temporary peasants, there were also groups who never left the construction sites. The artisans and permanent workers, whose constant dedication kept the works alive. Among the masses of peasants who came and went with the Nile's floods, there was one group that never left the construction site: the permanent artisans. They were different because they possessed skills that could not be improvised. Carving hieroglyphs, polishing stones with precision, molding statues, or creating ornaments required constant practice and mastery of techniques passed down from generation to generation. They were, in a sense, the manual elite of the time. These artisans lived in villages built near the pyramids, in simple but orderly homes. The smell of wet clay, the sound of light hammers, and the heat of the fire used to smelt metals were part of their daily life. Unlike peasants, who saw work as a respite from their agricultural routine, for the artisans it was life. Today, they might be compared to a programmer or designer who dedicates all day to their art, while others work in temporary cycles. Their dedication was rewarded with a more stable social position. Although they weren't nobles, they enjoyed a certain prestige, as their skills were indispensable. This was reflected even in their slightly better food and in the recognition of management. It's like when, in a company, a skilled employee is treated with more care because everyone knows that replacing them would be nearly impossible. Many of these artisans had families that grew alongside the construction site. Children played in the sandy streets, wives exchanged supplies and stories, and the community became a microcosm within the grand pharaonic project. This environment created a sense of belonging and continuity, transforming the village into a kind of city within the construction site. It was the old-fashioned version of the industrial neighborhoods that spring up around large modern factories. For them, time wasn't marked by the river's floods, but by the progress of construction. Each new phase represented more work, more learning, and in a sense, more pride. Many knew they would die before seeing the pyramid completed, but they continued on, because the idea of eternity outweighed the life of a single person. This sense of purpose is something that even today many seek in their careers and projects. While the permanent artisans kept the flame burning in the constructions, side by side with rotating peasants, a unique routine emerged, marked by collective housing in a simple but organized life. And it's at this point that it's worth taking a closer look at the lodgings that housed this mass of workers. Great works were built not only with arms and tools, but also with places that housed those who made them possible. Near the pyramids, villages sprang up, designed to accommodate thousands of workers. Adobe houses, streets of packed sand, and small communal areas made up a landscape that, at first glance, seemed simple but retained a sense of order. It was the temporary or permanent home of men who lived to build the eternal. Mornings began with smoke rising from the communal kitchens. The smell of baking bread mingled with that of onions and fish, common ingredients in the daily diet. The sound of conversations mingled with the clang of tools being prepared. There was a sense of routine, very reminiscent of small modern workers' villages, like those built near factories in the 19th century, where everything revolved around a single central activity. These villages were organized. There were areas for common workers, spaces reserved for skilled artisans, and sectors for administrators. The hierarchy that existed on the construction site was reflected in the dwellings, demonstrating that Egyptian social structure was evident in even the most mundane details. Anyone who has seen modern condominiums knows location and available space reveal each resident's status. The houses were small, with thick walls to mitigate the desert heat. Inside, the ambience was simple but functional: straw mats, ceramic vases, and rudimentary wooden beds. There was no luxury, but there was communal living. It was in this space that stories were told, songs were sung, and friendships were forged. After all, even amidst so much effort, human beings need to belong. In addition to residences, there were also communal spaces, such as bakeries, breweries, and even small spaces for religious service. These spaces reinforced the sense of community, making workers feel not just cogs in a machine, but part of something collective. Today, they would be like company cafeterias or leisure areas in planned neighborhoods, meeting places that create bonds. This village atmosphere demonstrated that the builders' lives were not limited to hard work. They had moments of rest, fellowship, and even celebration, and during these breaks, food played a central role, sustaining both body and spirit for the next day. Life on the pyramid construction sites required energy, and the workers' diet was simple but efficient. The basic menu included bread, onions, dried or fresh fish, and, of course, beef. These four elements provided the daily fuel for thousands of men who braved the scorching sun and the weight of the stones. It wasn't a luxury, but it guaranteed the strength to continue working without interruption. Bread was the staple food, prepared in communal ovens. The smell of baking dough spread through the villages, marking the beginning of each day. It was a rustic, dense bread that staved off hunger and sustained people for hours. Today, we might compare it to rice or pasta, a simple base that carries the responsibility of feeding multitudes. Onions, besides their flavor, had medicinal significance. They were believed to strengthen the body and aid in endurance. Many workers ate them raw, feeling the burning sensation rise up their noses as if stimulating them to wake up. Anyone who has ever drunk strong coffee before a tiring day knows exactly the effect of a food that not only nourishes but also gives courage. Fish, coming from the Nile, was an essential source of protein. Dried in the sun or grilled over makeshift fires, it brought a taste of everyday life. The smell of fish being prepared mingled with the desert wind, reminding the workers that despite the effort, there were moments of satisfaction. It was like a link between hard labor and the simplicity of a shared meal. Beer, however, was the most symbolic item in the diet. Unlike the alcoholic beverage we know today, it was thicker, almost a liquid porridge, and provided quick energy. Besides nourishing, it served as a reward, like a pleasant respite from fatigue. Today, we could compare it to the soda or sports drinks consumed on a large scale by workers and students, a relief that also creates a sense of community. This diet, though simple, kept those who built eternal monuments alive, and between meals, they returned to their hard work, braving the sun, the sand, and rudimentary tools that required almost superhuman effort. The workday began early, while the sun was still rising above the horizon, but soon the relentless glare became almost unbearable. The builders spent hours carrying stone blocks, smoothing surfaces, and adjusting ramps, all in the scorching desert heat. Sweat ran down their faces, soaking their simple linen tunics, and each breath brought with it dry air mixed with the dust kicked up by their footsteps. The physical exertion was constant, repetitive, and exhausting. The sound of supervisors' shouts, the scrape of sleds on the sand, and the metallic clang of tools created an atmosphere of constant tension. Anyone who has worked under the sun on a construction site or even a plantation knows the feeling well. The body craves rest, but the task cannot stop. The pace was intense, and rest was short. Workers knew that their strength was the true currency of the empire. Without muscles willing to push, lift, and align, there would be no pyramids. It's like today, when companies depend on the invisible dedication of delivery people, laborers, or farmers, people who rarely receive attention but sustain large social structures. The difference is that in Egypt, the reward was less material and more symbolic. Despite the hardship, there were also moments of cooperation. Many report that chants were sung to give rhythm to the tasks, helping to lighten the load. Imagine dozens of voices echoing in the desert, each syllable serving as a collective impulse to pull a huge block. Today, we see something similar in rowing teams, or even workers who sing together to maintain cadence. It was a way of transforming suffering into synchrony. Sunburned skin, calluses on hands, and a body bent from exertion were visible marks of this routine. But for many, such scars weren't just signs of pain. They were proof that they were part of something that would survive the test of time. This quiet pride compensated for some of the daily hardship. After all, carrying stones under the sun could be torment, but it was also a path to collective immortality. And even facing the heat and physical exhaustion, there was another challenge that required ingenuity. Working with rudimentary tools made of copper and stone, which made each task even slower and more demanding. The pyramid builders didn't have sophisticated machinery, cranes, or engines at their disposal. What they had were rudimentary tools made primarily of copper and stone. Chisels, hammers, saws, and improvised livers made up their basic arsenal. At first glance, it might seem impossible to build such grandiose monuments with such fragile instruments, but it was precisely repetitive patience that transformed the simple into the extraordinary. Imagine the sound of a copper chisel striking stone day after day, producing a dry, metallic, and constant sound. The process was slow, exhausting, and required not only strength but also precision. Today, it's like comparing writing a book by hand with using a computer. The result may be the same, but the effort is infinitely greater when technology isn't at your side. Copper, though malleable, was sufficient to cut the limestone used in most of the pyramid. For harder stones, such as granite, they used diorite hammers, an extremely resistant rock. The scene of men relentlessly striking a block until it yielded to the desired shape is almost unimaginable to those accustomed to electric machines. But it was this repeated effort that shaped the works. Tools weren't just instruments, they were extensions of the body. The worker knew the difference between a good strike and a bad one, knew how to feel the wear and tear of the metal in his hand. This required an almost intimate connection between man and object. Like a musician with his instrument, it's curious to see how, even with all the current advancements, we still value manual skill. The carpenter who knows how to choose the right cut of wood, the artisan who shapes a piece of jewelry with precision. The simplicity of these instruments reinforces a powerful lesson. Great results depend not only on sophisticated tools, but also on discipline, ingenuity, and persistence. How many times in life do we have limited resources and yet still manage to create something great? The pyramid builders demonstrated that with few tools and a lot of determination, the impossible can become a reality. And if with such instruments they were able to cut giant stones, there remained an equally monumental challenge: transporting these immense blocks to the right place, overcoming unimaginable distances and weight. Transporting blocks that could weigh several tons was perhaps the greatest challenge for Egyptian builders. Lacking efficient wheels for this type of load and modern machinery, they resorted to wooden sleds that glided over the ground. To make things easier, they poured water on the sand, reducing friction and making the movement a little smoother. It was a simple yet ingenious solution, demonstrating how creativity overcomes limitation. The scene must have been impressive. Dozens of men pulling thick ropes, coordinated by rhythmic shouts, while others dumped buckets of water in front of the sled. The sound of the ropes stretching, the creaking of the wood, and the collective effort echoed across the desert. Anyone who has seen a group of men pulling a stuck truck together can imagine, on a smaller scale, the strength required to move each block. Earth and stone ramps were another essential resource. Built at different angles, they allowed the blocks to be raised to surprising heights. There were no complex mathematical formulas or digital calculations. It was pure trial and error, adjusted by experience. It's similar to when someone assembles furniture without a manual, experimenting until they find the right solution, except in the Egyptian case, the piece weighed tons. This process required an almost choreographic synchrony. While some pulled, others pushed, and still others adjusted the sand under the sleds. The mistake of a few could compromise everyone's work. This collective spirit is reminiscent of sports like rowing, where each athlete must keep pace for the boat to move forward. In the Egyptian construction site, victory was the block finally placed in the right place. The transport was not only physical, but also symbolic. Each moving stone represented man's victory over nature, a reminder that collective will could overcome nearly impossible obstacles. It was the triumph of persistence over weight, of ingenuity over limitation. And once these blocks were in place, a fascinating detail emerged. It wasn't enough to simply stack them. They had to be aligned with the sky. transforming the pyramid into a work that communicated with the stars. The pyramids were not built haphazardly. Each stone block, each face followed a precise calculation. The builders sought to align the pyramids with the cardinal points and even with specific stars. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, is oriented almost perfectly to true north. This detail reveals that, beyond physical strength, a deep knowledge of astronomy also guided the project. To achieve this feat, the Egyptians observed the night sky. Without light pollution, the stars shone with an almost mystical intensity. The movement of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor helped determine the exact points, serving as a cosmic compass. It's as if each night were a classroom where the universe offered its lessons to the wise men of the time. Today we use GPS, but back then, the sky was the definitive map. This alignment had religious and symbolic significance. For the Egyptians, the order of the cosmos reflected the order of society. The pyramid, by aligning with the stars, showed that the pharaoh ruled in harmony with the universe. It's like when, today, a monumental building is erected in the center of a capital city to represent power and modernity. The architectural gesture is, above all, a political message. Imagine the impact this had on everyday life. The worker, looking up and seeing the face of the pyramid meet the rising sun, felt like they were participating in something cosmic. The sound of tools, the sweat on their bodies, and even the bread shared during a break seemed to take on new meaning. It was as if human effort were an extension of divine order. Who hasn't felt this way when participating in a large collective event, like a concert or a game, realizing they were part of something greater than themselves? The precision of this alignment continues to intrigue scholars to this day. Many wonder how, without modern instruments, they achieved such accuracy. The answer may lie in patient observation, the repetition of methods, and the deep respect they had for the heavens. The universe was their calendar, their compass, and their inspiration. And this quest for cosmic perfection didn't stop with the pyramid's orientation. It was also reflected in the cut and fit of the stones, which remain astonishingly precise to this day. One of the most impressive aspects of the pyramids is the precision with which the blocks were cut and fitted together. Even with rudimentary tools, the stones fit together so tightly that it's difficult to pass a thin blade between them. This wasn't the result of luck, but of meticulous work that required patience and skill. Each chisel stroke was calculated, each surface carefully polished. It was as if the builders were communicating with the stone until it yielded. Imagine the process. Giant blocks being extracted from quarries, transported with collective effort, and finally shaped to fit together with others of varying sizes. The sound of hammering echoed endlessly, creating a kind of repetitive music that marked the time. Anyone who has completed a jigsaw puzzle knows the satisfaction of finding the right piece. Now imagine that feeling on a monumental scale, with stones weighing tons. Precision wasn't just for aesthetics. It ensured stability and durability. By fitting together perfectly, the blocks formed a solid structure, capable of withstanding time, weather, and even earthquakes. This technique is very reminiscent of modern engineering, where a millimeter can determine the success or failure of a project. In Egypt, this attention to detail was a matter of the monument's survival. This extreme care also reflects a cultural value, the pursuit of perfection as a reflection of divine order. For the Egyptians, each well-fitted stone was a symbol of harmony between the human world and the cosmos. Today, we can see something similar in artisans who handcraft furniture or sculptures, dedicating hours to details that few will notice, but which make all the difference in the final result. It's curious to think that, even after thousands of years, these joints remain firm, as if they were made yesterday. This durability makes us question our own haste in building disposable things that barely last a few decades. Egypt, with its patience and precision, teaches us that solidity comes from care,
And this search for ingenious solutions didn't stop at stone cutting. It expanded to the entire construction process, leading to the development of rudimentary engineering techniques that are still impressive today.
The Egyptians lacked modern engineering manuals, but they developed practical solutions so effective that they still intrigue scholars today. Inclined ramps, counterweight systems, and land leveling methods were applied with almost intuitive wisdom. Each technique emerged from observation and experimentation, the result of generations learning from trial and error. It was the science of everyday life, written in sand and stone. Imagine a group of workers improvising with ropes, logs, and levers to move colossal blocks. The sound of the rope stretching, the creaking of the wood, and the collective effort created a spectacle that seemed chaotic but was carefully coordinated. Today, we see something similar in community construction sites where, without machines, they build entire houses manually, adapting solutions to what they have at hand. These rudimentary techniques reveal a universal principle. Genius doesn't depend on technology but on creativity. Using wet sand to reduce friction, leveraging the weight of rocks, calculating slopes through experience, all of this demonstrates how human ingenuity surpasses limits. It's the same spirit that exemplifies today's problem solving, whether it's repairing a car with basic tools or creating solutions in small workshops. This knowledge was passed on through practice, from master to apprentice. There were no books, just attentive eyes and calloused hands repeating movements until mastered. This form of teaching is very reminiscent of today's artisanal traditions, where knowledge is perpetuated through coexistence. More than technique, there was a sense of cultural inheritance, as if each generation carried the responsibility of improving the work of the previous one. These practices, though simple, resulted in works that defied time and logic. The Egyptians' rudimentary engineering shows us that the essence lies not in sophisticated tools, but in the ability to imagine solutions. How many times in our lives have we faced problems with limited resources and needed ingenuity to overcome them? This is where the past speaks directly to the present. And while the techniques allowed for the construction of immense walls, another challenge required even more ingenuity: the construction of the internal corridors and burial chambers, which would guard the pharaoh's secrets for eternity. The pyramids weren't just stacked blocks. Inside, they hid a veritable secret architecture. Narrow corridors, hidden chambers, and carefully planned passages formed an internal labyrinth. These areas served to protect the pharaoh's body and his treasures, creating a sacred space where eternity would be preserved. It was as if the pyramid were a body of stone, and within its heart pulsed the afterlife. The process of building these corridors required absolute precision, carving passages through tons of stone without compromising the structure was a feat of courage and calculation. Imagine men working in stuffy spaces, lit only by torches, the air heavy with smoke and dust. The sound of chisels echoing within the corridors must have sounded almost like a chant, blending work and reverence. Burial chambers were more than just stone rooms, they were eternal palaces. There, the pharaoh would rest surrounded by precious objects, food, and symbols of power, as if ready to continue his life in the afterlife. Today, we can compare the idea to modern vaults and mausoleums, where families seek to preserve memories and riches beyond death. The human desire for continuity is the same. The design of the passages also served as a trap against looters. False doors, inclined corridors, and sliding blocks were used to confuse and protect. It was a blend of engineering and military strategy, demonstrating that the Egyptians thought not only of construction, but also of defense. This mentality is still reflected today in modern security systems, which, although digital, follow the same principle: protecting what is valuable. Walking through these corridors, even centuries later, archaeologists report the sensation of entering another world, the heavy silence, the smell of ancient stone,
and the cold of the chambers create an atmosphere of awe and mystery. It's as if time stands still within, preserving the idea that death is not an end but a continuation, and these corridors which guarded the pharaoh also became an architectural legacy. They inspired not only later tombs in Egypt, but also influenced distant cultures, revealing how the desire for eternity spread beyond the desert. The Egyptian pyramids were not just isolated monuments in the desert, they became references for civilizations that came after. The simple act of transforming stone into symbols of power and eternity inspired distant peoples. The Greeks and Romans, for example, studied Egyptian grandeur and adapted it into temples, columns, and buildings that still influence Western architecture today. It was as if Egypt had written the first lines of a universal manual of monuments. The grandeur of the pyramids created the idea that buildings could be more than shelter. They could be messages. A city with grand temples or monumental palaces communicated wealth, power, and stability. Consider how today's skyscrapers have become symbols of modernity in cities like New York or Dubai. The principle is the same. Architecture speaks louder than words. This legacy also spanned oceans and centuries, reaching cultures that never had direct contact with Egypt. Mesoamerican peoples, such as the Mayans and Aztecs, built stepped pyramids that, though different in shape, shared the same symbolism, bringing humanity closer to the divine.
This similarity demonstrates how the search for eternity and connection with the gods is nearly universal. Even in contemporary funerary art, we see reflections of this legacy. Imposing mausoleums, cemeteries designed as veritable architectural gardens, and even pyramid-shaped family tombs are echoes of what began in Egypt. It's proof that an idea, when strong enough, spans millennia and continues to be recreated in different contexts. The impact was not only aesthetic, but also technical. The notion of planning, organizing labor, and designing large public works influenced engineering practices that developed in the ancient world. It's as if each stone in the pyramid planted a seed of knowledge that flourished in different places. But along with this legacy of inspiration also came debates and controversies that have spanned history. After all, how were so many tons of stone erected? Who actually built these marvels? Questions that have given rise to myths, theories, and diverse interpretations. For a long time, it was believed that the pyramids were built by chained slaves, forced to work themselves to exhaustion. This image, popularized in films and even in some ancient books, fueled a myth that persisted for centuries. However, modern archaeological excavations reveal a different reality. The builders were largely laborers recruited from peasants and artisans, not enslaved people en masse. The workers' villages discovered near the pyramids revealed organized housing, bakeries, breweries, and even dignified cemeteries for the workers. This indicates that they were treated with a certain respect, receiving food and shelter. If they were merely disposable slaves, it would be unlikely that they would receive such care. It's like the difference between imagining a prison camp and actually finding a community of skilled workers. This discovery also changes the way we view ancient Egypt. Instead of a system based solely on brutal oppression, we see a society that knew how to mobilize its population in the name of a collective goal. It's similar to large modern public works, such as dams or stadiums. They often require heavy labor, but they also offer sustenance and participation in something greater. The myth of slaves may have been reinforced by biblical narratives or by the need to simplify a complex story. After all, it's easier to imagine chains of chains than to understand an economic, social, and religious system that motivated people to work. It's like hearing a simplified version of a historical event that in practice was much more nuanced. By demystifying this view, we better understand the workers' motivation. It wasn't just fear or imposition, but also faith, duty, and even social benefits. Many saw the construction of the pyramids as a chance to secure supplies, create community ties,
and perhaps gain some prestige. This perspective makes the story even more fascinating, as it shows that greatness was born from the sum of multiple interests. And this discussion of the myth of slavery leads us to an even more complex question. What really motivated these people to work so hard? Was it simply obligation, or was there something deeper driving this multitude? What drove thousands of men to dedicate months of their lives under the scorching sun, carrying immense blocks of stone? The answer is not simple. Some of them worked out of obligation, summoned by the state during the Nile floods. But there was also faith, the belief that building the pharaoh's dwelling was contributing to the cosmic order and ensuring balance for all. Furthermore, the social benefits cannot be ignored. Food, shelter, and even a certain prestige were offered in exchange for this effort. Imagine an ordinary peasant in his village. He might have gone hungry during the flood, but at the construction site he received bread, fish, and beer every day. For him, construction wasn't just hard work, but a chance to serve. It's similar to people today who take temporary jobs on construction sites or harvesting crops, not just for the money, but for the immediate security it offers. Faith, however, gave the task a special weight. The priests emphasized that each stone placed was an offering to the gods. Thus, moving giant blocks was not just a physical effort, but a form of collective prayer. It's like participating in a procession, carrying heavy images for hours. Pain mingles with devotion, and the sacrifice takes on a spiritual meaning. There was also the issue of prestige. Many workers saw their work as a chance to be remembered as part of something grand. Imagine the feeling of being able to say, "I helped build the great pharaoh's pyramid." This collective memory became a family heirloom, passed down as a source of pride. It's no different than when someone helps build a stadium, a bridge, or an iconic building, and then brings their children to show them, "I was part of that."
This combination of factors, obligation, faith, and benefit, creates a more humane and less simplistic picture. These weren't just exploited bodies, but individuals seeking meaning and advantage in their participation. Perhaps this is precisely what explains the resilience and discipline that kept the project going for decades. And amid this discussion about motivations, controversies also arise about how these blocks were actually transported. After all, what techniques were used and to what extent were they masterful in methods that still generate debate today? Few topics arouse as much curiosity as how the Egyptians transported multi-ton blocks. Despite many theories, there is no absolute consensus. Some scholars advocate the use of sleds, sliding over wet sand. Others believe in gigantic ramps, spiral or straight, that ascended alongside the pyramid. The truth is that even with archaeological evidence, there is still room for mystery. This controversy demonstrates how Egyptian ingenuity continues to intrigue. Transporting blocks wasn't just a technical matter, but a large-scale logistical one. Imagine hundreds of men pulling ropes, while others poured water and adjusted the sand. The sound of the supervisor's orders, mixed with the collective effort, created an almost choreographed scene. Today, it would be like watching a giant assembly line, where every gesture must be synchronized. Some researchers suggest that internal ramps were used, hidden within the pyramid, explaining how the blocks reached such great heights. Others believe the secret lies in simplicity. Very long external ramps that allowed for slow but continuous movement. This divergence is reminiscent of modern debates over scientific theories, different hypotheses, all plausible but none definitive. The most fascinating thing is that the method, whatever it was, the pyramids have stood there, enduring for millennia, as silent proof that the impossible can be achieved. It's like looking at a bridge or a skyscraper today. We may not understand every technical detail, but we know someone mastered the process. This certainty is enough to fill us with awe. This discussion also reveals something about human beings. We have a need to explain the inexplicable, to find logic in grandiose deeds. Perhaps this is what keeps the controversy alive, because even when we know the how, we always want to believe there's more to the mystery. And it's this mystery that keeps the flame of curiosity burning. And if we still debate the methods used, even more intriguing is the doubt about how many people actually participated in these monumental works. One of the biggest enigmas about the pyramids is how many people actually participated in their construction. Estimates vary widely. Some say tens of thousands, others as many as 100,000 workers. The fact is that without accurate records, archaeology relies on remains of villages, food remains, and tombs to try to calculate. Still, the exact number remains a mystery, fueling debate to this day. Imagine the scene: thousands of men lined up, each group with its own specific role. Some cut stone, others transported, others cooked, and still others took care of logistics. The noise must have been deafening, a mix of shouts, hammering, and collective chants. It's like imagining a large city in motion, where every inhabitant contributes in some way to the functioning of the social machinery. Some scholars believe there was a rotation between permanent and temporary workers, which caused the number of workers to fluctuate. At certain times, there might be more men present, at others, fewer. This dynamic is reminiscent of modern construction sites, which swell or shrink depending on the construction phase. The logic of adapting to demand seems to span the centuries. The number of workers also becomes symbolic. The higher the figure, the greater the grandeur attributed to the project. It's like when we hear about millions of workers building railroads or thousands of engineers in space programs. The numbers are impressive because they reveal not only physical effort, but also social coordination. In Egypt, this reinforced the pharaoh's image of absolute power. Even without consensus, the essential thing is to understand that the pyramids were possible thanks to mass collaboration. Few human feats have required such collective organization. This uncertainty, far from diminishing the admiration, only increases the fascination. How many hands were needed to transform desert into eternity? And this same aura of mystery opens space for another type of discussion, even more speculative. Was there some advanced knowledge, lost in time, that would explain such feats? Over the centuries, the pyramids have inspired not only respect, but also theories that go beyond archaeology. Many wonder if the Egyptians possessed advanced knowledge that was lost over time. How could such precision and monumentality be achieved with such simple tools? This question has given rise to speculation, ranging from forgotten engineering techniques to bolder hypotheses, such as contact with unknown civilizations. Some serious scholars suggest that there were ingenious methods of transportation and cutting that simply left no record. Just as we use technologies today that may disappear in the future, it may be that tricks and practices have been lost over the millennia. It's like thinking about family recipes that weren't written down. When the generation that knew them passes away, the knowledge is lost. On the other hand, more fanciful theories have emerged, involving everything from mysterious energies to the involvement of extraterrestrial beings. While fascinating to the popular imagination, these ideas find little scientific support. Still, they demonstrate how humans feel the need to explain the inexplicable with something beyond ordinary reach. After all, it's more intriguing to think about cosmic mysteries than to accept human persistence as the answer. The curious thing is that this speculation also reveals something about ourselves. We underestimate human potential. When we look at the pyramids and think it's not possible, we're forgetting that thousands of men, with daily dedication and simple ingenuity, can achieve extraordinary feats. It's the same mistake we make when we think our ancestors were backward. The truth is, in many things, they knew more than we imagine. These theories, though controversial, serve an important purpose. They keep interest alive. It's precisely this mystery that keeps people studying, debating, and visiting the pyramids. We may never know all the details, but the search for answers is in itself a legacy. And while some lost themselves in grandiose speculations, others saw in the pyramids something more direct, a political instrument capable of reinforcing the pharaoh's prestige and shaping society around his figure. Each stone placed in the pyramid represented not only engineering, but also the pharaoh's authority. The monument erected under his command was a visible testament to his power. The larger and more grandiose the pyramid, the more the people believed in the almost divine strength of their. It was as if the desert itself bowed before the will of a man who claimed to speak in the name of the gods. Prestige came not only from the finished work, but from the process itself. Seeing thousands of men working day after day reinforced the idea that the pharaoh was capable of moving multitudes. Imagine a modern ruler announcing a gigantic project, like a dam or an airport, and making a point of showcasing all the resources involved. The message is clear: see what I can accomplish. Trust me. This prestige was also political. By erecting monumental structures, the pharaoh cemented his image as the protector of the people, ensuring not only the afterlife, but also earthly prosperity. For his subjects, there was no separation between the success of the pyramids and the order of the kingdom. The pharaoh literally became the cornerstone of society. There was also a psychological component. Looking at the pyramid, the peasant, who barely had an adobe house, realized the distance between his life and that of the ruler. This contrast created respect and obedience. It's similar to when someone sees a huge skyscraper designed by a large corporation. It's not just architecture, it's symbolic intimidation. This prestige was so strong that it spanned generations. Even after the pharaoh's death, his pyramid remained a constant reminder of his greatness. It was like an eternal signature on the landscape, impossible to ignore. People passing by felt small in the face of the work, but also part of something greater, and this symbolic power didn't stop at reverence. The pyramids also functioned as propaganda, showing everyone, subjects and foreigners alike, that the pharaoh was capable of turning dreams into stone, a silent reminder of who truly ruled Egypt. The pyramids weren't just tombs, they were stone billboards, permanent messages etched into the horizon. When someone saw that colossal structure rising in the desert, they needed no explanation. The pharaoh was powerful enough to command thousands of men and bend nature to his favor. It was silent propaganda, but far more effective than any speech. Imagine being a foreign traveler arriving in Egypt and coming across those buildings. Even before meeting the pharaoh, you already understood the extent of his authority. Today, it's like visiting a modern capital and seeing gleaming skyscrapers or monumental bridges. The architecture speaks for itself, conveying a message of wealth, organization, and power. For the Egyptian people, propaganda was part of everyday life. Every time they looked up at the pyramid under construction, they were reminded of the pharaoh's almost divine presence. It was a daily reminder that their life, their work, and even their faith were aligned with that ruler. It's similar to when a company logo appears everywhere, even without realizing it. Repetition creates an impact. Furthermore, the pyramids reinforced the idea that the pharaoh was eternal. Even after his death, his imposing presence remained imposing in the landscape,
conveying the sense that the social order would remain firm. This type of propaganda had no expiration date. As long as the pyramid stood, the pharaoh's power would be remembered. This propaganda effect extended beyond borders. Merchants, diplomats, and even enemies passing through Egypt were confronted with a clear message. Here, power is absolute and eternal. It was a form of strategic intimidation, demonstrating that defying the pharaoh was like defying the gods themselves. And over time, this propaganda stopped being just political and began to shape Egypt's cultural identity, transforming the pyramids into symbols of who they were as a people. For the Egyptians, the pyramid was much more than a monumental construction. It was a reflection of the people's very identity. Each face, each stone, conveyed the idea of belonging to something greater than everyday life. Looking to the horizon and seeing that mountain of stone erected by collective effort, the Egyptians saw not just a royal tomb, but a symbol of who they were as a nation. This identity manifested itself in the worker's pride. The peasant who left his village for months could tell himself he was part of the pharaoh's work. The artisan, when carving hieroglyphs, knew his hands were helping to immortalize history. It's like when someone today proudly says they participated in the construction of a bridge, a stadium, or a museum. The individual feat gains meaning within a collective achievement. The pyramids also united generations. Parents who had worked on the construction would tell their children about their efforts, creating a narrative of continuity. This formed a link between past, present, and future, as if everyone were bricks in the same wall. This symbolic inheritance recalls family traditions today, when recipes, stories, or professions are passed down from father to son, keeping the essence of the group alive. Religiosity reinforced this identity role. For the people, helping to build the pyramid was not just a job, it was a spiritual duty, a way to ensure that Egypt remained in harmony with the gods. This sense of community gave the nation a rare cohesion, hard to find in civilizations of the same era. The pyramid, therefore, was both a religious monument and a patriotic emblem. Even for foreigners, the pyramid became a hallmark of Egypt. Passers-by were reminded not only of markets, temples, or the Nile River, but also of the stone towers that dominated the skyline. It was a kind of cultural emblem, unmistakable and eternal. Thus, the Egyptians knew that by building these structures, they were also carving their own image in the world. And this cultural identity wasn't just symbolic, it had concrete repercussions on Egypt's economic and social life, transforming people's daily lives and shaping the way society functioned. Building pyramids moved not just stones, but the entire economic machinery of Egypt. Each transported block required food, tools, clothing, and housing. This meant more production in the fields, more work for artisans, and more circulation of goods. The pyramid functioned as a huge economic engine, boosting several areas simultaneously. It was a project that extended far beyond the desert. For the peasants, their daily lives were directly impacted. During the Nile floods, when they couldn't farm, they were called to work on construction sites. This cycle took them out of the fields, but also kept them integrated into the state system. In return, they received sustenance, beer, and even basic medical care. It was hard, but it also provided security in uncertain times. The economy revolved around this logic of redistribution. The state collected taxes in grain and livestock and converted them into sustenance for construction workers. This practice, in addition to feeding thousands of people, reinforced the centralization of pharaonic power. It's similar to modern governments that invest in large-scale public works to stimulate employment and demonstrate political strength. This system also brought indirect benefits to the villages. Peasants, who spent months in the pyramids, returned with stories, experiences, and even new skills. This circulation of people spread plots, strengthened bonds, and broadened the worldview of the common people. It's like when someone from a small town works in a metropolis and then returns with new knowledge for their community. However, one cannot over-romanticize there was wear and tear. Families were separated, crops could be delayed, and the physical exertion left lasting scars on the body. The economy prospered, but at the cost of individual sacrifices. Even so, most accepted this burden, believing the kingdom's balance depended on it. And when this balance began to crumble due to political crises, internal disputes, and economic hardship, the pyramids also ceased to be built on the same scale. The end of the Old Kingdom would mark the decline of this monumental era. As the centuries passed, the splendor of the Old Kingdom began to show signs of wear. Internal power struggles, coupled with economic crises and the difficulty of maintaining such grandiose projects, weakened pharaonic centralization. What was once a symbol of stability began to reveal cracks, not in the stones of the pyramids, but in the very political system that sustained them. Resources, once abundant, began to dwindle. The administration could no longer manage tax collection and food distribution as efficiently. The people, tired and less motivated, saw the burden of work increase without the same sense of purpose. It's like when a large company loses its visionary leadership and begins to lose the strength that once set it apart. With this, the pyramids ceased to be built on the same monumental scale. The gigantic scale of the Giza Plateau would not be repeated. New pharaohs opted for smaller projects, more modest temples, and less costly alternatives. This change reflected not only practical limitations, but also a shift in the collective imagination. The era of eternity in stone was coming to an end. The decline of the Old Kingdom paved the way for periods of fragmentation, in which regional rulers gained more power. This decentralization undermined the ancient logic, in which everyone worked for an absolute pharaoh. The pyramid, which had symbolized unity and order, could no longer sustain the same narrative. It was as if the great monument had fulfilled its function, but no longer found anyone who believed in it in the same way. Yet the pyramids stood as silent witnesses to an age of glory. Even when Egypt was in crisis, those mountains of stone reminded everyone of a time when the impossible had been achieved. This physical presence kept the memory of the Old Kingdom alive, even after its collapse. And so, the story of the builders reaches its turning point. A people who, with sweat, faith, and ingenuity, erected monuments that outlasted entire empires. But this is not just the story of the past. It is also an invitation to reflect on our own quest to leave marks in time. If you've made it this far, you've already realized that the story of the pyramid builders isn't just about ancient stones, but about ordinary people, like you and me, who dedicated their lives to something greater than themselves. The question remains, what have you been building in your life that will truly last? Are your daily efforts merely erecting temporary walls, or monuments that will remain as a legacy? Think about it. Every small habit, every decision you make, is like a block placed in your own personal pyramid. Are you placing these stones haphazardly or with purpose and precision? Sometimes the difference between being forgotten and being remembered lies precisely in paying attention to details that seem insignificant today. Now I challenge you, what would your pyramid be? What project, dream, or mission would you like to leave for future generations? Write in the comments, because sharing this is the first step to turning a wish into reality. Who knows, maybe your words will inspire someone reading this. And remember, knowledge is only valuable when put into practice. It's no use just listening to fascinating stories from the past. You need to apply them to change the present. What will you do from now on to align your life with what truly matters? If this reflection touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way you can continue learning, reflecting, and discovering unexpected connections between the past and your own life. Because history, after all, is the best mirror we have.